It seems like there are two kind of anonymous government sources here in DC when it comes to the culture of journalism. Those approved and many times planted by government officials to bolster themselves, and then of course insiders, whistleblowers who are trying to expose government wrongdoings. How would you describe this kind of dichotomous culture in DC and the kind of opposite ways that they're treated?
No, I think that's a good way to put it. I think there are different kinds of leaks. You can tell, and if you've been here a while, you can tell the difference. You can tell, given the context and the news flow, when something is being leaked officially by the White House or by the Pentagon or something. And then you can see when the stories that are inconvenient to everybody come and people begin to complain about whistleblowers. So it's very easy to tell, and it's usually a difference that the official leaks from the White House don't get prosecuted and they don't get investigated. And nobody wants to get to the bottom of why those leaks came out, because it's not in the interests of the powerful people in the government to reveal themselves as the leakers. And it's only the cases where it's somebody else or it's something that's inconvenient that they have this zealous prosecutorial approach to trying to find out who's talking. And that's why I have often said that the whole purpose of these leak investigations is to force journalists to only go down accepted paths of reporting. If you stay within a certain parameter of covering national security affairs that is the official sanctioned path, then you won't have any problems. They'll never subpoena you, they'll never investigate your stories. But if you go off and try to do stories and aggressively investigate things that they don't want you to investigate, then you'll be punished.
You've extensively reported on the national security gold rush, as you've called it, this permanent war economy. But within this vortex is, of course, endless corruption, mismanagement of funds. So many instances of this in your book, but let's just talk about the huge racket to line the coffers of private defense contractors in Iraq, from KBR DynCorp to Blackwater. Of course, KBR and DynCorp's cover-ups were overshadowed by Blackwater's over-the-top criminality. Right. But you cite one military official that says KBR ran Iraq. At the height of the war, managed 4,000 buildings, 35,000 container housing units across the country. During this time, several cover-ups of KBR's criminal negligence. Talk about the electrocution scandal and what the government did to help KBR avoid accountability.
Yeah, well, that's one of the more tragic, really sad stories of the Iraq War was in 2000, I think it was 2008, Staff Sergeant Ryan Maseth, who was a Green Beret, was taking a shower in his barracks outside Baghdad and was electrocuted. And his mother was told that he had died in Iraq, but didn't get very many straight answers. And she was a woman from Pittsburgh who was really not willing to just, take the military at their face value.
What did the military tell them happened?
Well, at first their story kept changing about what happened. I think at first they said he brought in a hairdryer into his shower and that he had killed himself with that. And then when they backed off that, said, no, there was just a poor, there was a wire hanging out or something like that. And she just said, well, your stories don't make sense, and began to look into this. And it turned out that there were soldiers being electrocuted all over Iraq that nobody realized. And I found, for instance, that there had been alerts sent out years earlier about safety problems, and nobody had totally ignored. And I think there were 18 soldiers, U.S. soldiers, who had been killed in Iraq by electrocution, and nobody had ever looked at that issue. It was just happening all the time, and people were just saying, "Oh, well, that's too bad," And I really think that if she hadn't asked questions, a lot of this, would never have been uncovered.
Did the government know about this?
Well, that's the question. You know, that's one of the things that's been investigated. There was she had, and I document this in Pay Any Price, there was a possibility of a criminal investigation of KBR by the Army criminal investigators. And she was told that they were going to declare her son's death as to be negligent homicide by KBR, and then that ruling was never issued, she believes that the criminal inspectors were overruled, and she was told, if you really want justice in this case, you're going to have to go to the civil courts.
You know, even if the government didn't know, it's still just outrageous that there was not more management of how these things were being constructed and oversight.
They gave KBR this contract to basically run everything. And there's this other case where I talk about the auditor for the Army who was in charge of the contract for KBR initially for Iraq. They were given basically the contract to cover all basic services for U.S. troops in Iraq. And it was, at first, nobody realized how big that was going to be. And then as the contract kept exploding in size, this auditor at the Army at Rock Island, where they did the auditing of what they call LogCap, which was the main KBR contract, he said, he kept telling KBR, you haven't given us any bills to explain all the costs that you're billing us for. You haven't given us any records. And they kept refusing for like a year. And finally he said, I'm going to deny your costs, the payment to you, because you're not giving me any records to back up any of your bills. And the next thing he knew, he got fired. He got pushed out of that job. And so that's the kind of thing that was going on behind the scenes.
You know, I know that this is a huge story, obviously, so let's try to truncate this down, but I can't not ask you about this because I was stunned to learn in your book the extensive government infiltration and impediment to the 9/11 victims' families' lawsuit against Saudi Arabia right from the get-go. I mean, how did the government insert itself to exploit that lawsuit from the get-go, and why do you think it did this?
It's a real mystery. There are a lot of questions about that I try to just raise a lot of questions about what was going on, because to me it was one of the great mysteries of the post 9/11 age of what was really happening in that case. Clearly, at some level, some of the investigators involved in the 9/11 lawsuit also were working in parallel with the U.S. government on some things. And I know that the lawyers involved in the lawsuit, some of them were furious when they figured this out. And it's totally unclear what was really going on. But to me, that was like a metaphor for the post 9/11 age, is that the war on terror became so crazy that you really don't know what's going on anymore. It's just this massive thing that we now live with, that's taken over so much of our lives that we still don't fully understand the full breadth and scope of what is the war on terror today. And that's what I was trying to get at, is just kind of the Kafkaesque nature of what we're trying to do as a country on counterterrorism.
Because, of course, the rationale for not preventing 9/11 was all these different agencies couldn't get the information to each other. But then you have, after 9/11, this insane, massive apparatus that seems like it's almost more obfuscated, more confusing. You talk about
I mean, what happened after 9/11, Congress said, okay, how much money do you need? And then
the blank check.
A blank check we've had a blank check for 15 years on terrorism. And these agencies, at least, especially in the first few years, they had no idea what to do. And they were being given more money than they knew what to do with. And people were saying, if you have an idea, go do it. And that was, and here's a blank check. And that's the way it was being operated on.
You were targeted under the War on Terror in Iraq when we were going after Al-Qaeda. Now we're going after ISIS, kind of this ubiquitous threat,
Right.
justifying an endless military operation now in the Middle East and beyond. Trump has said he wants to carpet bomb Syria and Iraq.
Yeah.
Hillary's talking about putting 10,000 troops on the ground already. How does this kind of foreboding premonition fit into what you describe as kind of the empire's policy of endless war?
We keep bombing and droning, and we've tortured people. We've, killed thousands of people over the last 15 years, many innocent people in lots of different countries. And Americans don't want to admit that our actions have consequences. Politically, it's very difficult in the United States. Nobody wants to say that. Nobody wants to say the reason somebody's mad at us is because we killed people in their country, or we bombed their hometown, or something like that, or that people are being radicalized because Muslims are being radicalized because they're angry about what happened in some country that we bombed. But if you look at virtually every lone wolf or every Muslim extremist who has had an attack in the United States, almost all of them talk about how they're mad at what the United States has done in the Muslim world. And we ignore that. We ignore what they say is the reason. And so we keep having these silly arguments about how, why do they hate us? They hate our values. No. The real reason is because we have bombed their countries, attacked them, killed thousands of people, many innocent, and we've led to resentment. Our drones are like an imperial weapon. So, I think until we, as a country, recognize that, we're not going to get out of this cycle.
You said it yourself that a permanent war economy cannot last.
Right. This is what happened to the Roman Empire. And it's what happened to the British Empire. They bankrupt themselves eventually in long wars, long periods of war. And I think that's the ultimate end if we continue this.